Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing podcast. I'm Kate Moryoussef, your host, and if you've arrived here, there must be a reason. I'm guessing you're curious to learn more about improving your wellbeing alongside ADHD, or maybe looking for some advice or guidance to feel healthier and calmer. So, why start this podcast? I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids, and I discovered my own ADHD alongside one of my daughters at the age of 40. And now, after supporting many other women just like me, and probably you, I feel there's a need for more emphasis on wellbeing and lifestyle help for women with ADHD. And through the podcast, I want to offer you new insights and perspectives to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm and balanced life. So wherever you are on your ADHD journey, my aim is to support you in finding the awareness and the most aligned tools to enhance your well-being so you can make the most intentional mindset and lifestyle choices moving forwards. Ready to get started? Here's the episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing podcast. And today's guest is Dr. Samantha Hiew. And she is the director of ADHD Girls, which I think just says it as it is. And this is a company with a dual mission to empower girls and women with ADHD to thrive in society and improve societal understanding of ADHD. And do we need it more than ever? So Sam, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. We've been waiting for a long time for this and finally it's here. So I'm really glad that we managed to schedule our diaries and finally get here. So welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me in the first place. I remember that when I got your invitation, to be honest, I've been reading your blog even before my diagnosis, and I think some of the articles that you wrote really helped me. So interesting how things just kind of go around in the end, and then I get to meet you in person. I mean, not in person, but yeah, I get to share a screen with you and we get to have a chat.
Absolutely. I want to hear a little bit about your diagnosis story, because what you've achieved in a short amount of time with ADHD Girls is incredible. And what you're trying to, I guess, take on is big. It's a really big mission that you've got. So tell me, how long has it been since your diagnosis and how did it come about?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed formally in March 2021, but I started looking into my diagnosis in September of 2020. Was really fascinated by this, what do you call it? It's not a medical condition. It's not a psychiatric condition. I see it as a behavioral thing, I suppose. When I think about ADHD, I think about someone being hyperactive. And I remember being that person as a child. And so I was really fascinated and came across someone on social media, actually, who talked about it and really did a deep dive and wanted to make a film about women with ADHD, because I think I always needed to find a special interest. And later on, I found out I'm also autistic. And that's why I've needed to have something that I focus on and be passionate about. Otherwise, I get depressed. And so my diagnosis story is that I think I struggled a lot in my life. And there are so many times where my ADHD just caused me so much issues and challenges, and it didn't work for me. My life didn't work for me. I told you I did a PhD in cancer research, and for as long as my educational years were, I was so focused on being a cancer researcher because I've attached my mission to helping people. And it was to a level of obsession that my lecturers didn't understand why I was so fascinated by cancer. I should have really gone to neuroscience because I was also really fascinated by the brain, but then somehow cancer felt more relevant at the time because people around me were dying because of cancer. So I felt that was an important topic. So with ADHD is, in that short time, even before my diagnosis, I started talking about it. In fact, I didn't do it voluntarily. Someone invited me for a LinkedIn Live where 1,000 people tuned in way before I even had a diagnosis and way before I knew enough, I think. Although I was studying a lot of ADHD, like most people do when they try to understand ADHD, they really hyper-focus on the education, the psychoeducation. So when I was asked my opinion on what I think people should do, if they have ADHD, and I'm thinking, I haven't got a diagnosis yet. I felt like a real imposter. And straight after that LinkedIn Live, a friend of mine got in touch and said she's a psychology student. And she told me that, you shouldn't be talking about it at all because your PhD wasn't in psychology or neuroscience. And when I got that message, I was really sad. And in fact, like my RSD kicked in and I thought, oh, I'm never ever going to say anything ever again. Even though I didn't voluntarily do that LinkedIn Live, I was invited to by somebody. And so I thought, yeah, I'm not ever going to talk about anything again. But, I had a day or two thinking about it. And in fact, the RSD probably lasted a good 2-3 weeks. And then at the end of it, I decided, oh, screw that. Live experience is really important. If I can't go ahead and tell people about my story, why don't I tell other people about their story? So because, as you know, hearing from the source is more important than hearing from a psychiatrist tell you about ADHD. Because most of the time they don't know what it's like in the internal lives of women with ADHD. And so the more people I spoke to, the more I just felt like, wow, this is so interesting. And it was like a therapy for me. Everyone I spoke to just made me feel so validated and so happy. And at times I remember having these goosebumps, speaking to them. And then, yeah, eventually it just kind of grew into this thing. And I was telling a girl in my community recently that imagine naming your entire business because, Instagram handle for ADHD women were taken, right? So ADHD girls was really a way for me to just do like some part-time posting on Instagram, but it kind of grew into this thing that I just followed this obsession, and it went from one thing to another. And I've always got this passion for how neurodiversity has really impacted my career because I've worked 16 work sectors. And so, yeah, I went into ADHD in the workplace topic and started doing more and more interviews. And then I organized a conference by accident. That's happening in 2 weeks' time. So, yeah, a lot of the things I do, I almost let my emotions lead me, and then yeah, one thing led to another. I can't tell you the trajectory of how it happens, but
Yeah. I feel like I'm nodding away because I understand. And I feel like a lot of other women with ADHD definitely get this kind of like hyper focus, especially I think around the diagnosis. I speak to a lot of women who get the diagnosis and they do hyper focus on all the research, want to know everything, want to inhale every bit of information, books. I did it. It literally, I mean, I'm still doing it because first of all, I find it absolutely fascinating. It's definitely a passion of mine now because I can see how needed your services are. What I'm doing with the podcast is I know that people are needing this. But another arm to, I think, an ADHD trait is that we are very kind of giving, like we want to help. I think being of service is really important. And what you said before about if you're not doing something that you're passionate about, you feel depressed. And I do see that sort of that pattern a lot. If we don't feel of use, if we're not being productive, if we don't feel like we're achieving something, it can lead quite quickly to sort of very low mood, depression. Again, I 100% resonate with that. And so what you've done, I think you've taken it to the next level. So you got your diagnosis, and then because of your research background, your scientific interest, the fact that you've done a PhD in cancer research. I mean, if you've done that, you can pretty much do anything. So you've now given this understanding of yourself, this awareness, and understood how your neurodiversity has played out in your career, and you want to be able to help other women in that situation. Tell me a little bit about your mission with ADHD Girls. Where did it start and where do you see it going? What's your dream with it?
Yeah, so very quickly after my diagnosis, I noticed that, I really didn't have any help after my diagnosis. I kind of fell off a cliff and I resisted medication for at least 6 months because I was still breastfeeding. And so I was trying to do all these lifestyle things and, all these changes that I was like trying to exercise more, I was trying to eat better. But then I just didn't have the executive functioning to carry on with that. So I slipped. And then the situation that I was in didn't allow my autistic side to stay under control. So I was often very sensory overloaded. And so I didn't have the support, and I just looked everywhere and I just felt completely alone. And I, just thought that there needs to be some sort of service out there that helps people feel more together, like they are part of like a group, that's like them, and that's basically why I created my community. And I have people in WhatsApp group now. This is also completely free for anyone, women with ADHD, to join. And for them, I think that's been more helpful than actually talking to their therapist. But just having someone you could check with, like almost ad hoc, to kind of check with, like, oh, is this kind of like normal? It's invaluable to have that. And also, what I want to do with ADHD Girls is really help people fulfill their potential. And it's not just this drive to keep achieving. It is the drive to create your own authentic life. Because for me, I was diagnosed at the age of 40, and I just felt like I didn't even realize that's midlife to most people. And when I realized that, I think I had a second round of grief cycle where I just kind of imagine, that the 40 years of my life was spent jumping from one thing to another and not actually putting all the skills I have together. And that led me into constant depression in the past, even though from the outside it looked like I had everything. I had children who were beautiful. I have a husband, and, I have a career, even though it was like a freelance career. It was not like a corporate kind of climbing career, but, I had something. But I always felt so unfulfilled because I couldn't follow through, in everything I needed or everything I started, because as soon as that challenge or the interest wanes, then I just find a way to exit. So I spoke to my coach recently that, I have an exit strategy for most things, because ultimately, I think for an ADHDer, who loves autonomy and freedom, it's very difficult to work according to what other people think is important. And I think, that's why running your own business or creating your own venture is one of the better ways, more suitable ways for ADHD, if you could do that.
Yeah. I wanted to just ask you about your autism diagnosis. So did you have them together? Which one came first? And which one were you most surprised about?
Right, definitely surprised by the autism one. Because with ADHD, I think when you have ADHD, it's like, why do you just forget things sometimes? Why do you misplace things? Why is your room a mess? It's like you'll be confused by it, but then you also wonder, is there something behind it? But with the autism one, I didn't even have any idea, no inkling at all, because if you Google symptoms of autism, you don't get, some of the symptoms that people are going to get on the autistic spectrum. And the sensory overwhelm, I didn't know what that looked like. I just thought that maybe I'm just an angry person when I'm in a situation where it's like too hot or too smelly or too, people's touching me too much. That's why meltdown is often mistaken as anger or tantrum. And then people can't understand because they don't know where it all comes from. It's so sudden. And that happened to me when I was cat and dog sitting in the summer, and didn't realize how much I didn't like the smell of dogs. It's really sad because I love animals, but I can't stand the smell of them. And it was in a very hot house. I was constantly like really upset. And I can see that with my children as well. This is not just me. So that I felt like the strongest about. And what was interesting was that when I got medicated by ADHD, I thought, oh yeah, this is me. I'm going to go out and check out the school moms. I'm going to be completely fine with them. I was so confident. But the social anxiety still stayed. And I was like really confused. So then that led me to realize that, wow, maybe I'm actually more autistic than I am ADHD. And it was just so interesting that ADHD was diagnosed first, because you feel the fatigue, as you get into perimenopause. And I had the brain fog, which couldn't explain before.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and I've sort of read interesting articles that actually it's a lot more common than we think for ADHD and autism to go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sort of see ADHD as like one thing and then autism as another, but actually they sort of could belong on the same spectrum, and it's like knowing which ones you got stronger. It's kind of like a scale, isn't it? And like you're turning up the bass and you're turning down the treble, and it's kind of, that's how I kind of feel as well. I mean, what you just described about the sensory stuff, I've always had that with smells and heat and needing, to be comfortable in situations and environments and being very particular. I'd never consider autism. It's just interesting because I know I have lots of things that I'm very particular about. And I think it's so important that we have these conversations, because when, like you say, there's the same stigma that ADHD has had for all these years. Autism has the same stigma of just like, well, we see autism in one way, and we see the extreme versions, but we don't see people who are functioning, day-to-day functioning parents and women being what we perceive as sort of normal, and we're doing inverted commas. And then we understand how it plays in our life, how they interplay together, the ADHD and the autism.
Mhm.
What, now I'm going to ask you on the flip side, where's the ADHD and the autism helped you in your career? Where's it helped you as a person? I know that you've talked about the social anxiety and all of things.
Yeah.
Let's kind of flip the positive a little bit. Tell me where that showed up.
Yeah, so I think my ADHD showed up more when I was younger, and I think being autistic has helped me with actually, surprisingly, I had really good memory when I, was in school. So I used that to hack the education system, because that's really what it's about, isn't it? It's about memorizing things. You're hardly really doing constructive criticism in primary or secondary school. So I did that, and I kind of hacked that system. But I really worked so hard. I had to double, triple down. And very interestingly, I had a mentor in school who believed in me so much that I just kind of changed my whole life around. And being ADHD, I think, there's rejection sensitive dysphoria, but there's also recognition responsive euphoria, where you recognize when someone praise you for something that you do well, and then it gives you this boost of energy and self-esteem, and you want to have more of that. And I always say that being recognized for what I do is one of my values, because it almost drives an ADHD, because it helps you think, oh, you're actually pretty good at that. For me, actually, that took me down almost 10 years into cancer research, but later on kind of decided that I don't want to do that anymore. So these are areas where in school, autism and ADHD kind of work together to help me get through school. That's really interesting. But then yeah, in the workplace, that has been, my ADHD has been more of a challenge, because I couldn't really stay for longer than 2 years. But I think I've always been able to do stuff, under pressure. And I thought that was like an advantage for a long time, but that also led to burnout. And I think that's why at the end of 2 years, I kind of had enough. I just have to take a break and go on a holiday and just quit my job and move on to the next one. So yeah, there were pros and cons, definitely.
I really relate to that. Yeah, that need to know that. I think it's what you said before was really interesting, the exit strategy of knowing that we've got a way out, because we can feel so confined and constricted. And I think, when we start recognizing, and I think this is really sort of pertinent to what you do within the workplace, is when we recognize our values are freedom, autonomy, individuality, like being able to sort of work on our own and being able to work almost to our own time schedule as well. That then gives us the freedom to expand and fulfill our potential. But it's when we are confined and we're told what to do and how to work. I think that's the sad thing, is that the ADHD people have got so much to offer, so much to give, and as well as, people with autism. But if we aren't being nurtured in the way that we should be in a work environment, it's just, and again, it leads to burnout, it leads to depression, and we end up leaving jobs that potentially we could and should be staying in, or careers or businesses that we just decide, finished. And that has a massive impact on our self-belief, our self-esteem, and actually, that I love the recognition. I know that it's Dr. Halliwell that sort of talks about this, because I heard the same talk and I was like, oh my God, I love it. So it's recognition. Just remind me, what's the...
Yeah, it's recognition responsive euphoria.
Yes. I think this is so important that people know about this, because that I see it with my daughter. And the minute I praise her, it's like, ooh, I can see. And she just thrives off being praised. And it took me a while to believe the praise, but now I know that gives me a boost as well. And thank you for bringing that into the conversation, because that is something that I think if you're managing someone with ADHD, or you work with someone with ADHD, or you have a partner or a child, just to have that in mind, if there's nothing else that you can do, just to sort of know that working on strengths-based and praise has a really big impact, doesn't it, for someone with ADHD?
Yeah, I mean, I like that you said that's how you talk to your daughter now, because the same thing, happened to me, and I totally changed how I talk to my daughter and really try and have positive affirmation rather than the other way around, where I think ADHDers often get criticized by what they're not doing right. And in fact, like, I try to correct my husband as well in the way he talks to her, because all this contributes to the negative thought patterns, right, that builds in you over time. And in fact, she has 7 years of us being sort of completely ADHD without knowing it. So now it's like our chance to kind of like rewrite the narrative, for her. And like you say, they really respond and they beam when they feel like they're being appreciated. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to be appreciated for what they do well or the person that they are. And I suppose no one needs that more than someone already with low self-esteem, because that they've been constantly told they're not good enough.
So I'm just interrupting today's podcast because I want to let you know about a brand new program that I'm relaunching towards the end of January 2024. And I've got a sign-up page on my website right now. I have to say, this is probably one of my most exciting programs so far. This is all about changing the energetics from within and changing our stories, releasing old blocks, old conditioning, and creating a new future, visualizing a new way of being, and really letting go of the things that have been holding us back. This is all about our spiritual growth, leaning into what feels right to us and not doing all the shoulds and the needs and the comparing, and working on the internal dialogue and the stories and the words that we say to ourselves. But often we find it very difficult to get there. So in this program, it's going to be me holding you accountable, motivating you, giving you practical but also spiritual and energetic ways of shifting the dials, changing the way we think and the stories that we tell ourselves and the words that we use. It will be probably a 45-minute workshop every 2 weeks for about 3 or 4 months. So I'm going to be sort of hand-holding you, helping you make decisions and choices that feel right and aligned with you. This is stepping into your most truthful, authentic version of you and changing this reality and really leaning into a different way of being now that you have more awareness. I really believe that this is something that I've been working on for many years, and I can't wait to finally share some of the tips and the ways that I have helped change how I show up in the world, because it's very different to how it was 5 years ago. I'm really going to be creating a community of people who are ready to step out of a mentality that feels like the world has been doing things to them and start taking action and charge from a place that feels good to you. And this is not about doing, this is about being, this is about feeling. So if you really don't align with this sort of action and goal setting and sort of new year resolutions, this may be a much softer approach for you and really work with our neurodivergent minds. So head to my website. You're going to see on the homepage a sign-up page. If you just put your name and email address there, I promise you that when this is all live and I've got all the details, you guys are going to be the first people to get it. Now back to today's episode. What do you talk about in your conferences, or what's your plan in the conference that's coming up to boost and bolster people within the workplace so they can enhance their lives alongside, and thrive alongside their ADHD?
Yeah, so the reason I set up the ADHD Best Practice Conference was that I was seeing people putting up conferences, and there it is, kind of leaders or whoever from academic or medical institutions talking on our behalf. And then at the same time, I'm hearing the stories of ADHDers getting pushed out of work and, taking their employers to tribunal. which have increased a lot in the last year with the awareness of neurodiversity and people unmasking. So then I feel like there has to be a way where someone can bring them together, the two sides together, the organizations that claim to be having neurodiverse policies, right? And then the ADHDers with lived experience to share best practice approaches through the mouth of the ADHDers themselves. And one of the trigger for this was that I was seeing people who were just talking about autism at work. And at the time I was like, oh, what about the ADHDers? There's so much focus on autistic individuals, not knowing that I was actually one of them too at the time. So it's interesting. But so this conference, really, it's a very quick half-day conference, which is really going to bring people together and get their opinion on what they think, would work for them in the workplace. So ultimately, I think the takeaway of this is that people can go to the conference and come back with, okay, actually now I can see the bigger story, because one of the elements of the conference is intersectionality, and that is how we are not just ADHD we're not just autistic, we're not just dyspraxic, or we don't just have tics, we have a whole, multi-dimensional history and culture and, the person that we are that affects how we are at work, and so I think that would just encourage people to even have less of a stigmatizing thought of neurodivergence, because that's one element, right, of who we are, even though it might become who we are. It might be the only thing we think about on some days, but the reality is, even though we are ADHDers, even though we are autistic, we are all different. We might have some similar traits, but all of us have different stories. It might come up differently. Like, say, for a person of color, our ADHD traits might manifest in our body rather than anxiety or depression, might be a health condition, right? So I think the take home is that I want people to understand that this is going to be something that's going to really help, ADHDers really show the other side, what is needed, and hopefully with this understanding, it's going to provide more of a change, in destigmatizing ADHD. I think it's in some ways it's an advocacy campaign of mine, but in a very kind of roundabout way that provides value to people.
Oh, I'm sure it will. And what you mentioned about, people of color, there are so many different communities out there that are thinking sort of neurodiverse, but they're also battling other things as well of the stigma. So it's so many different layers for people to deal with. And I think the fact that the more conversations we have about this and different people's experiences and, different communities have not, I mean, I don't know, where did you grow up? Where did you have your education?
I grew up in Malaysia.
In Malaysia. Okay. So how, was ADHD and autism ever talked about in the schooling system? Was there a SEND department in the school then?
No, never. I think in the Asian community, neurodiversity don't exist, and also mental health issues don't exist. We only see the most extreme cases. So in some ways, parents don't even want to be associated with this label, because as far as they're concerned, you're the most serious case if you get labeled as something like that. So there's no understanding. In fact, now, I've heard some other Asian neurodivergents, they don't tell their family. There's no point really discussing this with the previous generation, because they just don't want to understand.
And that's really hard, because I think such a big part of having a diagnosis is actually then having to talk to your family members about it, and people that friends and even your partner. I know for myself, it's something that you don't just come out and go, guess what? It's people's reactions. And I think it's combined with RSD of what people are going to say, like the fear of judgment. And we've got the stigma, and it's very real and it's very there. We're in, 2022, and we're still afraid of people dismissing ADHD and going, oh, what are you talking about? Of course you don't have that. I mean, that's real. The fear of when you get that diagnosis, especially if you're in a community that doesn't believe in ADHD, doesn't understand it, sees it in the sort of like the old 1980s kind of way of looking at it. I do feel like it can be very hard for people because they get over it's the grief that you just talked about. It's the going through the assessment, the gaslighting yourself. You're like, do I really have it? Isn't this just nonsense? Maybe I've just made it all up. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Then you get the diagnosis and it's like, oh, okay, right. This is all real. This is all true. I've not imagined it. Now I've got to go and have this conversation with 4 or 5 different people, and with the fear that I have to then over explain myself. And it's hard. It's really hard. And I hope that, these conversations that we're having on the podcast is giving people ammunition and empowering people to know the right things to say, and to recognize where their ADHD shows up in their life, so they can advocate for themselves, especially at work. I mean, I know a lot of people who get the diagnosis, but they're not terrified to go to their boss or their employees and colleagues and say, actually, this is what's going on for me. So I guess what you're doing with ADHD girls, and the advocacy that you're doing is giving people the tools and the language and the narrative to be able to feel a bit more confident to go and have these conversations.
Well, exactly. Like I definitely can relate to finding it hard to communicate, your what you need for your ADHD, when you go back to work, because you almost need to decide, do I unmask completely, or do I just try and like bring in some of the old coping strategies in order to keep this job that I don't mind doing or I really love, so it's really difficult, and I always think it's best to be honest, because if you are not, it's going to find a way to creep up anyway. It's much better to just be aligned with who you are internally, especially when you spend so long, not knowing that you have ADHD or, are other neurodivergence. So I brought in Professor Amanda Kirby, who does a lot of workplace training, to run this workshop on emphasizing on especially how you communicate this, your what you need. And really, it's very strengths-based approach where you really focus on the things that are great about you and remind them, on what is great about you, the reason they hired you. And then, just say that there's these challenges that I have in order to do my best work, and talk about what they are. And then the important thing is that you check in as well afterwards, and not just have that one conversation and be done with it, but because your needs might change over time as you know more about the jobs. And so you need to put in a review at a later time. So yeah, that's been really helpful actually. It's one of the most popular workshops.
I can imagine. And I think, in 20 years time, 15 years time, I hope that we'll be able to be all open and be able to talk about it at work, and be, I think it's important to have a bit of a sense of humor around this as well, and kind of like know that it's okay to be lighthearted a little bit, and be able to have these kind of open conversations where people don't feel uncomfortable, and we all know what's going on with each other, because this kind of way of being incredibly professional and you don't talk about anything beyond this point, I think it's going, and it's disappearing, since it was kind of on its way out before the pandemic, and now we had this period of time we all worked from home, and we had meetings, and we saw each other's houses, and we saw each other's living rooms, and we didn't have to kind of suit and boot, and it all felt like the vulnerability, I think that's what it is the vulnerability kind of gave way, and we were able to all be a little bit more ourselves. I mean, I've seen it with my husband. He runs a big team of people, and just the way I think things have evolved within his business, it's definitely, I think the vulnerability and the openness and the compassion has led the way since the pandemic. And I think this is just going to translate into neurodiversity in the workplace, because the more we can be open and talk to each other about anything mental health wise, neurodiversity, we're going to get the best out of each other, aren't we? Like, we're going to collaborate better, we're going to connect better.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely also gives you an excuse for why, say, you can't stand a long meeting, or this form is going to be really difficult for you to fill, because these are the things that don't light us up, even though people insist we do them, right? So just little get out of jail cards. But as long as, you say, just communicate it with humor as well, because people ultimately want to work with you because of you, right? Because I think that's how really people do their hiring at times. They really look at the feel, the vibe they get off you, right? To see if, am I going to be able to get on well with this person? And if you do, then, that's easier for you to then ask for what you need.
So tell me a little bit about, like, if someone's listening right now and, I'm sure there's people working in lots of different industries, how would they get you to come on board? Like, how does it work with bringing you in for advocacy within their own businesses? I'd love to know more about that.
So I've been talking to, a lot of organizations, and really it's, I think people who've been following my work for a while. Recently I had a call with someone who booked me for a large in-person talk, and I was really curious where they found me, because they didn't say, and they were really mysterious. And, they came on board and they said, I've been following you for a while now, so I know who you are. And I'm like, do I ask where you know me? But I know it's from social media. It's either LinkedIn or Instagram. I run a lot of polls, right, on Instagram, asking people what they need. So I'm always putting my ear to the ground on what the true community with lived experience need. I think that might actually separate me a little bit, from other people who might be creating services based on what they think, ADHDers need or neurodivergents need. And so, yeah, I think it's also true. My LinkedIn lives that I used to do, I don't do them very much anymore. But I think it's not just one thing, though. I think it's many little things that really, contributed to all this. And in the workshop that I just gave a few weeks ago, I talk about having sponsors and allies, people who are willing to talk about you in the rooms that you are not in yet. And I think one of the reasons why ADHD girls have really, elevated so quickly is that I saw people who I thought from afar really admired them, and I thought they would never ever give me a chance. But they did. In the end, I had all these people who've been working for 20, 30 years on this topic who want to support me, and they are the people who are going to be talking at my conference that I'm organizing. And yeah, so that has kind of helped, I think. But also just building connections, which has taken some time. It's not just me going straight to somebody and say, hey, would you like to do some work with me? It doesn't work that way. You kind of build friendship and have an interest in what people do. And for me, it's all genuine, because personally I couldn't like be bothered to talk to anyone if I don't really like them. So yeah, so it's helped that I've made a lot of friends as well this way. And yeah, I don't really have a secret formula.
It's kind of like, if you go, you're going to find ADHD women who perhaps don't even know they're ADHD, and they're going to get that epiphany moment of, if you go and speak in their workplace and, they've not had the opportunity to read any Instagram blogs or, kind of even know about ADHD, and you're all of a sudden just piecing things together for them while they're, been working in that industry forever. So I think it's just so important that the more we can talk about this and we can get the advocacy out there, and know that there is the resources and the support for women to connect, and women to kind of meet like-minded, other women who can help them and support them. And I love the idea that you've got the WhatsApp group, because I just think that, like you said, if you haven't got the lived experience, even though you could have all the education and all the, the letters after your name, I think so often just someone else understanding and relating to what you've gone through and going through is a huge help. I'm excited to see where ADHD Girls is going to go. So if people want to get in touch with you, or want to sign up for your newsletter or anything, or even go, because I know you have quite a lot of events coming up, where's the best place for them to head to?
Yeah, so everything is on my Instagram Linktree, and I post that on Twitter as well, even though I'm a bit quieter on Twitter. And you can always add me on LinkedIn. I post both Instagram and LinkedIn on a weekly basis. I have my email in my Instagram, so if you just click through, you'll be able to email me directly. So I'm very accessible. It's too easy to find, in fact. And although if you Google me, you will find like really kind of posy photos, because I do commercial modeling as well, though I do it less and less now.
I love that. How ADHD is that? You've got a PhD in, cancer research, and just on the side, you do a little bit of modelling.
Yeah, it's really random. And also been a source of identity crisis for 10 years. At least I know why now, right?
I think let's embrace it because, I think variety is the spice of life. And when we can mix and match, and who says that someone with a PhD shouldn't be a model? I mean, I think let's just do what, lights us up. And I think just before we finish, that element of us where perhaps we thought it was wrong, like what am I doing this, because I should be doing that, I should be in that box, but actually I want to be in that box, and that box. And we would then feel badly about that, or ashamed that we are not kind of conforming to what other people are doing. And actually, it's okay to have a bit of variety, and it's okay to want to try new things and to move on, and to just kind of like exhaust one subject. We've kind of, done the hyper focus on that, and then find something else. Because, for me, on a more philosophical level, life is for living. We only get one crack at it in this lifetime. So let's just kind of embrace what interests us, embrace our strengths, and kind of it's very easy to focus on the weaknesses. It's very easy to kind of keep ourselves stuck in that negative thought loop. But when we start moving towards the strengths, moving towards our interests, and just having a little bit more fun in those different areas, that's when I think we thrive with ADHD. That's when I see people thriving, when they kind of access those things that just light them up. And I know it's not that, professional, but if you are doing whatever that is, whatever lights you, whatever kind of gives you that buzz that gets you up in the morning, then just keep doing, just keep reaching for that next thing that lights you up. And whatever that is, you're going to be successful in it, because that's when I see ADHDers kind of really reap the rewards of their neurodiversity.
That's right. Yeah. And like you say, we are very much interest based, right? And if it's not something we like to do, we can't convince ourselves, no matter how hard we try. So it's best to just, find all the great things that you love about you, and maybe one day bring them together like you have, right? You put together everything great about yourself, you put that all together into, Kate Moryoussefand coaching and the podcast and all your lifestyle, well-being stuff. It's really great to watch.
Thank you. Oh, well, Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate everything that you're doing and all the advocacy, because I know that a lot of women, lots of different people are going to really benefit from what you're doing. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate. Really lovely to meet you today.
So that's today's episode done. Did what we talk about resonate with you? I really hope you found some takeaways that may inspire you to make some small changes that enhance your daily life. And if you did find this episode insightful, please do consider sharing it. Knowledge and awareness is power, especially with ADHD. You can also head over to the show's Instagram page, which is ADHD Women's Wellbeing Pod, and join the community that's waiting for you there. And if this episode really did strike a chord, please do consider leaving us a review to enable more people who need to hear these conversations find the show. Thanks so much for joining me today, and see you next time.